In the previous video, we proved Euler's formula, which stated that e to the I phi equals the cosine of phi plus I times the sine of phi, where phi is some real number. And we understood that this thing here is the rotation operator in the complex realm. As in, if you take some vector z and apply to it e to the I phi, this has the effect of rotating z by phi radians in the anti-clockwise sense about the origin. And it's actually this operator that allows us to come up with a new representation for complex numbers. In the first video, we saw that z, any complex number, can be expressed as x plus I times y, where x and y are real numbers. And this is sometimes called, rather often called, the Cartesian representation of complex numbers. But in fact, there is another representation called the polar form, which I'm about to construct in front of you. For that, we need the complex plane. So let's consider a positive real number r. And by positive real number, I mean just some point here on the positive real axis. And the vector representing r is exactly what I've drawn in green. Now, if I subject this vector to a rotation by phi radians in the counterclockwise sense, I get this new vector representing a different complex number in the plane z. But wait a minute, how exactly did I get this vector again? I got this vector by taking r and subjecting it to the rotation operator e to the I phi. So that means z and r times e to the I phi are exactly the same thing, and this is exactly what we call the polar representation of the complex number z. Now let's study r and phi as functions of the complex input z. Starting off with the r variable, well, we know that the length of a vector is invariant under a rotation, right? Vector lengths are unaffected by rotation. So that means the length of this vector is still r. But wait a minute. The length of any vector in the complex plane is the absolute value of that complex number. So that means r is just z modulus, which implies that r equals the square root of x squared plus y squared, where x and y are the real and imaginary parts of z. And that's pretty much it. That's all we have to say about r as a function of z. Yeah, not exactly that interesting right now anyway, because we've already studied the properties of the modulus operator. I provided a write-up on that at the end of the first video. But the phi variable, that is a lot more fun. Phi is actually called the argument of the complex number z. And this argument function is something called a multi-valued function. Yes, you heard that, right? Multi-valued functions are something quite common in complex analysis. And a lot of the times, throughout the whole time, in fact, in the series where I'll be constructing functions, constructing complex value functions, I'll be talking about how to make them single-valued, because an obvious problem with with multi-valued functions is being multi-valued means that they're not continuous. But anyway, that's the subject of future videos. The point is that the argument function is a multi-valued function, and it's actually the OG multi-valued function. But what is it that makes argz multi-valued in the first place? Well, what exactly is the angle phi? Well, phi is actually the angle rotated in the anti-clockwise sense in getting to z from the positive real axis. But if I take a look at my diagram, if I start at the positive real axis, to get to z, I could have just as easily rotated by phi plus 2 pi radians. That would have gotten me from the positive real axis to the vector z as well. So that means for this complex number z, as shown in the diagram, phi as well as phi plus 2 pi are both perfectly valid outputs. And that means for any non-zero complex input z, I have infinitely many outputs in the form of phi plus 2 pi k, where k is some integer. Okay, cool. So for each non-zero complex input, you have infinitely many outputs. Hence, the argument function argz is multi-valued. Notice that I've excluded the zero specifically because you can't exactly define an argument of zero, right? It's just like the zero vector. The zero vector doesn't have a defined direction. And by the same token, for z equal to 0, the argument is undefined. A function being multi-valued is kind of disadvantageous. The main reason for that is we cannot talk of a function being continuous if it's multi-valued. Yeah, that's a bummer. But is there a way to fix this? Is there a way to make the argument function single-valued? Well, thankfully there is. We just restrict the argument function. And by restricting it, we define something called the principal argument function, argz with an uppercase A. And this is defined sort of arbitrarily to be bounded between pi inclusive and negative pi excluded. So this thing here is nice and single-valued. But how do we go from this multi-valued function to this nice single-valued principal argument function? For that, we make use of something called branch cuts. Now, branch cuts are something that we're going to be using quite a lot in complex analysis. So yeah, it's a good idea to get used to them. What exactly is a branch cut? Let me show you what a branch cut is. Let me describe it visually and demonstrate exactly what it does. That will explain to you exactly what a branch cut is. Once again, we call on our friend the complex plane, and the branch cut in this case is taking the origin and the entire negative real axis. This is your branch cut. Okay, that's what it looks like, but what does this thing do? How does it restrict the argument? To see that, first let me draw this vector representing some positive real number r. So here I have z equal to r, and the argument of z is 0. Now if I rotate this vector in the counterclockwise sense, and then I reach the negative real axis, then on the negative real axis, the argument of any complex number z equals pi, because I rotated pi radians in the counterclockwise sense. Okay, cool. Now what about the negative values of the argument function, of the principal argument, that is? Well, for negative values, you have to rotate in the clockwise sense, of course. So I'm rotating in the clockwise sense, and I stop just short of the negative real axis. What do I mean by stopping just short of the negative real axis? That's something very difficult to draw, but something very easy to describe analytically. By stopping just short of the negative real axis, I mean that the argument of z will always be greater than negative pi. So in the clockwise sense, you never actually get to the negative real axis. So the branch cut restricts the argument to lie between pi inclusive and negative pi excluded. And this function here, the principal argument function, is nice and single-valued. The multi-valued problem is now gone, all thanks to this branch cut. Now, let's take a look at some properties of the argument function. Please remember that all of these properties hold modulo adding to pi. The first property is that the argument of a product z1 times z2 equals the sum of arguments, and this is pretty easy to prove by taking a couple of complex numbers. z sub 1 and z sub 2 and multiplying them in the polar form. So we have r sub 1 times r sub 2. Oh, terribly sorry about that. Z sub 1 is r sub 1 times e to the I phi sub 1, and z sub 2 is r sub 2 times e to the I phi sub 2. So this can be written as r sub 1 times r sub 2 times e to the I phi sub 1 times e to the I phi sub 2. So this here is just r sub 1 and r sub 2, but what exactly does this product mean? Well, e to the I phi sub 1 means a rotation by phi sub 1, and you're following that up with a rotation, a further rotation by phi sub 2. So that means first you rotate by phi sub 1, then you rotate by phi sub 2. So this is just one big rotation by phi sub 1 plus phi sub 2 that can be represented by the operator e to the I phi sub 1 plus phi sub 2. Okay, cool. That's pretty awesome. So this implies that the argument of z sub 1 times z sub 2 evidently equals the argument of z sub 1 plus the argument of z sub 2. Another property is the argument of the inverse of z. This equals the negative of the argument of z. And to see this, all we have to do is take 1 by z in the polar form, so that would be 1 by r times e to the I phi. And what exactly is the reciprocal of e to the I phi? We saw in the last video that the multiplicative inverse of e to the I phi is e to the negative I times phi. And this proves that the argument of 1 by z equals the negative of the argument of z. And from here, it's easy to see from the above two properties, that is, that the argument of z sub 1 divided by z sub 2, where of course z sub 2 is non-zero, equals argument z sub 1 minus argument z sub 2. Okay, cool. Now what about the argument of a complex conjugate? What would that be equal to? Well, let's take some complex number. Z equal to r times e to the I phi, and apply the conjugate operator. This implies that we have z bar equal to, r is just a real number, correct? And we have r times, expanding this using Euler's formula, we have the cosine of phi plus I times the sine of phi, all barred. And the conjugate operator just changes the sign of the imaginary part, right? So that means you now have r times the cosine of phi minus I times r times the sine of phi. And again, you can just factor out the r, so you have r times the cosine of phi minus I times the sine of phi. And we saw in the last video that this thing here is e to the negative I phi. So this implies that z bar equals this thing, which further implies that the argument of z bar also equals the negative of the argument of z. Okay, cool. Again, these properties were pretty easy to prove and easy to see. And that's pretty much a wrap for polar representations. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you. See you next time.